This is using query September 21, 2020. And the agenda for today is mostly to review some of the work that's been done and the associated docs to support integrating query with a lot of different tools used widely in the data science and other communities like Jupyter Notebooks, which we've demoed before, but also R, datawrapper, Kepler, whatever Chris exactly wants to dive into. And I think we can leave any time at the back end for any other using query sort of stuff, but that's the main driver. Chris, do you want to take over?
Sure, let me share my screen. Okay, you should see a Chrome window. Do we?
We're good.
Okay. So if you click on our docs page, which has this nice little landing page, and scroll down under this integrating query section, you'll see a bunch of new stuff. So before this, all it had was working directories, which is kind of a overview of how to integrate query with the file system, so you can actually just start writing files in place and have query pick up changes to a data set, and using spatial data with query, which is really just more of a here are kind of special ways to encode your CSV. It's not wasn't really query specific, but it was much more about storing spatial data inside of a CSV compatible tabular structure. But what we've added recently is these 4 tutorials for, or I guess docs/tutorials for different third-party tools. So datawrapper, kepler.gl, Python, Jupyter, and RStudio. So before I go in to look at each one, there's really 2, when we say integrating query, there's kind of 2 different genres of integrating, I guess we're talking about. One would be integrating via the API of query.cloud, which is newly published and will allow you to be able to get versions or the latest version of the body directly from Query Cloud where it's hosted. And the other method of integrating query is going to be integrating with your local query instance. So first you must understand the difference between query local and query cloud, and then you can get into what these are. So let's start with datawrapper. So effectively this datawrapper integration, datawrapper is a chart building tool. You can upload CSV data into it, but it also has this really cool feature where you can link directly to a CSV that's hosted somewhere else. So Query Cloud is not necessarily a hosted CSV, but it can put out, the API can send out a CSV, which is kind of the same as hitting a download link, which pulls it out of where it's stored in Query Cloud. So I'll just scroll down through this. We're not going to go through it in detail, but basically you can paste in a URL for api.query.cloud is what you see here in the fine print. So consider that, basically like a CSV download link. And then once you've got it in, datawrapper just has some really easy, intuitive tools for customizing your charts. You can do like bar charts, and this is a scatter plot of earthquake depth by magnitude just from a kind of sample query data set. And then what it also allows you to do, so a lot of journalism organizations will use datawrapper because it just makes these really nice embeds. So this is an iframe embed that's also interactive. This took like 2 minutes to create once we had the CSV in. So that's just one example using datawrapper. Another one we did was Kepler. So Kepler, kind of in the same vein as like a client-side only web mapping tool. But same deal is that you can paste in a CSV link. So let's scroll down here and you can see, again, fine print, but there's a little text input there that lets you say, where's your data hosted? And you can just paste it in. So as long as you get your query API call, it'll then just start throwing, it does something similar to what Carto would do, but it goes through and looks for intuitively named columns that probably hold a geometry. So in this case, we're looking at point geometry. So it went through and said, oh, I see columns called latitude and longitude in this data, because this is an earthquakes data set. And it said, okay, I'm going to turn those latitudes and longitudes into XY coordinates on the Earth. But it can also look for a column called geom that might have a GeoJSON geometry in it, like a line, string, or a polygon. Or it also could look for well-known text. So it kind of tries to figure out what you have in your file and then attempts to put it on the map. And then you can use the styling tools. It's got a nice GUI for making charts and categorized, in this example, sort of categorized by type, so you can choose a column. So yeah, basically a nice, easy to use front end mapping tool. I think both of those examples are great because, query right now, it's a place to archive and store your data, but it's if you want to actually do some analysis with it, you have to bring it somewhere else, and these are kind of the easiest graphical tools to use. If you want to get a little more fancy and do something a little more code-based, we have an integration with Python and Jupyter, or Python in general, but you can use it in a Jupyter notebook. So this is now we're moving into integrating with query that's running locally. So you would need a local query instance to run this example. But basically, we show pulling a data set. You have to install a query Python library, and then basically, if you do query.get, and then you add the data set reference. This is kind of query speak for a unique identifier for a data set. And then say get the body, you'll get yourself a data frame. And then you can do all of the things that you would normally do with the data frame. So what we're doing here is just saving you the step of having to actually download a file. Usually is how people start, save it to their file system, make sure it's in the right place and they know where it is, and then import it into their Python environment. Here you can just get it directly out of query and vice versa. So take a look at our Python library. And then last but not least, RStudio. I teach RStudio in my class at NYU. So it's kind of fresh on my mind, and I wanted to see what it would take to do similar things. So we didn't quite build a library yet, but I did build some code that would be the beginnings of a library if somebody wanted to. Again, I won't bore you with some code in this example, but we have enough to get started if you're an RStudio user that you can jump in here. And it's doing basically the same thing that the Python library was doing, is that it's talking to your local repository, your local query instance. And what it gets you above and beyond, saving the step of exporting to CSV and then importing into R, is that it also pulls in the schema from query and maps that into the parameters that read CSV in RStudio would expect. So it's basically taking advantage of the fact that query data sets all bring schema with them, and that you're not left to the mercy of column type guessing when you import your data, which can lead to problems, of course. So hopefully on the way back out, we can do the same, which I haven't set up code for, but these CSVs are where there's a lot of value loss when you have a data frame in R or Python. You save it to CSV, and the next person to import it may not get the same schema, but using query they can. So anyway, this is the first of several. I think we've already had a request for observable, which is like JavaScript notebook environment. And there's some other things coming down the pike. So we hope to be able to say whatever your flavor is, or whatever your passions are for working with data. We hope to have something on this list that you'll find intriguing. So it's also, the docs are open source. So if you have one that you want to contribute, by all means, either PR a stub or PR the actual doc, and we would love to take a look at it. Any questions?
I do. Have we looked into making an R package at all? And has anybody ever made one? I've not made one.
Good friend of mine who's assistant instructor of mine in my class has made an R library in the past. So he's probably the first person I would ask, but I don't think it's that hard. I think you can find a tutorial and get started pretty quickly.
Awesome. Because yeah, it seems really exciting. It's really nice to have even at least starter docs for these. I think the other thing we talked about was maybe making some modifications to query.cloud to sort of have people jump off to these integrations faster and easier. Others, we haven't really started mocking that up at all, but is that generally something we'd like to move on to sooner rather than later, or do we think just putting people to the docs first is a good starting point?
Margot and Chris.
I would say, particularly with the, okay, so I'd say before that's needed, just the existence of a URL that is essentially a download link could be brought closer to the user in query.cloud, wherever there's a data set, or wherever you're looking at a data set preview in query cloud, there's a corresponding body CSV API call that goes along with it. We ought to show that to people, and then right underneath that, where can I use this thing? It would be, you can throw this into Kepler, you can throw this into datawrapper, you can throw it into observable, and any other place that speaks CSV. I think that would be a worthwhile first step to let people know that there's stuff you can do with a query data set beyond look at the preview page once it's published or pushed.
I think that sounds fantastic. Cool. Those are my questions.
I think it's cool. Nothing much to add aside from that. It's good to see a bunch of integrations all kind of fall out at once because, we're set up for that.
Yeah, the RStats community is large and loyal, so we should have no trouble reaching out to folks who are comfortable working in R and having them kick the tires on it, hopefully.
It's also just going to be nice to have answers for people when they come into Discord asking questions about these exact things. I want to use it with this, I want to use it with that. Well, here's a link.
Yeah, I think we should totally as that chatter starts to increase, we should definitely whatever the FAQs are that we collectively determine, just from watching this for weeks, ought to turn into docs pages probably.
Deep agree. And I think the only question that I the last thing that I've realized that we've been doing a little bit in Discord and not really talking about a bunch in public is or not in public, Discord is public, is showcasing some of these uses, right? We've had people the Kepler data wrapper and observable examples all came out of people actually building stuff with query data that does that. But maybe at some point we want to actually just build a showcase of people using query data, but
No.
that's a thought that just happened right now. I'm not saying we need to do that tomorrow, but I know that I have a set of links that I've collected now of just people doing cool stuff with query stuff.
Showcase sounds great. I mean, that also comes to mind from a UI perspective. It'd be kind of neat to pin little little cards of where this data set is used. Might even be cool to come up with a custom meta field so that you can just create all that stuff and have it live with the data set instead of live in another database somewhere. All kinds of cool extensible things we could do with the with our meta component.
Oh my God, yeah, it's a reverse citation. So excited by.
Yeah, downstream, show downstream.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it'd be nice to maybe code up a page even if we wait to launch it before, obviously get folks permission before we launch anything like that. But I think that'd be a really good idea, because whenever I take calls with outside stakeholders on what query is being used for, how to use it, I'm limited by what's fresh on the top of my mind versus having a place to go and show off any number of different things people are using it.
Exactly. In Canada.
Fun. It's delightful.
Cool. Any other pressing business or fun ideas and related to the using of query?
I think it was relatively short this week. A lot of our using query stuff is now really happening quite actively in Discord. And so if you're watching this and you've made it to this part of the video, definitely join the Discord and ask us how it is there. Speaking of people using query, this last week we had two users join with a lot of questions about validate and using query to validate data sets. And we're shipping some new improvements to that will show up in the next release of query. And also a number of great pieces of feedback on query desktop, which Casey, I think, worked on shipping and Chris just worked on vetting. And so those pieces of feedback are really starting to come forward. And so maybe in this using query call, we should start to sort of summarize some of what we've been finding week to week, just very quickly in the Discord channel. But that's kind of what we've been seeing. Some nice little UI improvements desktop, and then making validate work a little better, which, I mean, validates output. If anybody's worked with the CLI side of query validate, it's its output is a little gross, and it's now much less gross, and you can tell it to spit out JSON for you, which is way more useful if you're looking to sort of like link validation to a broader tool chain. But yeah, I think those are the biggies this week. This week became a lot about validation and desktop UI. But I think that's all I had.
Cool. Let's call it a meeting.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yep. And we'll be doing building query this coming Friday. I don't know if you want to preview that a little bit. It's okay if you don't.
This Friday, we're going to start talking about spec, because we have a spec website. You can cheat and look at it right now. It's totally unfinished. It's at qri.dev. And that's where we're going to actually put together a query spec. And hopefully we'll get some good stuff going. I think the glossary page on that one is like the only thing that's like really, truly useful. But well, the team has been discussing for a while the need for a specification document and like understanding what query actually is at a very technical level, or the way it's supposed to work, so that we can write code against that. And so that's what we're going to be talking about probably at length on Friday. Just understanding how the spec interacts with what currently exists, and probably just pick one piece of the spec and attack it as a example of what the spec should be doing for us as a crowd of people writing code against an unexisting and hopefully soon existing document.
Wonderful.
We did it. Thanks so much, everybody. See you next week.
See ya.
Or see you Friday.
Friday.